Today we get most of our news delivered electronically on smartphones or computers. Some people have it tossed on their driveway in the early morning hours, so they can enjoy the feel of opening up the newspaper with breakfast. But in the early 1900s, the Newsboys were the ones responsible for delivering the news. The Newsboys were young children who sold newspapers. They had to make enough money for life's necessities. The Newsboys lived a life of uncertainty. Many were depressed, yet some were able to stay calm and endure the hardships of a difficult life. The Newsboys lived in Brooklyn, New York. Newsboys were often prematurely aged, and some would start smoking at a young age. Newsboys would sell newspapers all day and were depressed when they couldn't. If they didn't sell, they were forced to go hungry. Almost all newsboys didn't have a home. They would sleep on and under stairways, abandoned buildings, and sidewalks. The newsboys were often violent. However, when Kid Blink told the newsboys they could still be on strike without being aggressive, all violence stopped.
We're going to try to square this thing without violence, so keep it cool. I think we can win this thing in a walk.
I remember one cold night seeing some 10 or a dozen of the little homeless creatures huddled together to keep each other warm. Charles Loring Brace.
Newsboys tended to be 6 years old to 14 years old. Some newsboys had their 100-paper stacks almost be too big for them to carry. Newsboys would sell their newspapers from the time they got them to late night. Whether it was raining or snowing harshly, the newsboys were forced to stay outside and persevere. A war was caused by the two newspaper leaders of New York, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. These two wrote fake news about the Spanish-American War to create tension. Before America joined the war, newspaper companies had already raised their prices. When the war was over, all companies lowered their prices except the New York World and the New York Journal. As you can see, the newsboys are attacking a wagon that is coming in with newspapers. The boys had pinned their lives and hopes on getting newspapers. The money from the newspapers would go to their food. Without getting any papers, a newsboy might not live to the next day. Fights would erupt over newspapers, especially when a newsboy didn't get any. The newsboys also received supportive speeches from the newsboy strike leaders. These speeches encouraged the newsboys to continue striking.
Friends and fellow workers, this is a time that tries the hearts of men. And this is a time we need to stick together like glue!
After the boys found out that the prices had been raised, they went on strike. The boys would protest on the Brooklyn Bridge and bring traffic about. The boys already had trouble paying 50 cents for a newspaper, but now they had to pay 60 cents. The newsboys would attack stands and newsboys that were still selling newspapers. For a couple days, newsgirls were left alone. However, companies were still making money off of them, and the newsgirls were told to stop selling newspapers. The newsboys would hold rallies and parades, but their biggest parade was stopped because they did not have a permit. The rallies and parades weren't the only way the newsboys got the public's attention. The protest on the Brooklyn Bridge brought the public's focus onto the strike, as it was one of the main bridges in New York, and the newsboys were creating traffic. A committee was created by the newsboys to keep the strike organized. This was called the Newsboys Union Strike Committee. The committee was composed mainly of newsboys and a couple adults that supported the strike. As the strike progressed, Pulitzer and Hearst noticed that they were barely making any money. They needed to talk to the Newsboys. They offered to lower the prices back down to 55 cents, but the Newsboys wanted the prices to be 50 cents, their original price. Older men were asked to sell the newspapers by the newspaper companies, but the men wanted to respect the Newsboys' wishes and declined. While nobody was buying the New York World or the New York Journal, other newspapers prospered, and they wrote about the strike. Men hired by the newspaper companies would come at the boys with bats, and they would be taken to the jail with the police. Younger boys would go to the Gary Society, an orphanage, while older boys were sent to juvenile jail.
We're here for our rights, and we'll die defending them.
After 2 weeks, the newspaper companies offered the Newsboys a deal they couldn't resist. The companies told the Newsboys the newspapers would stay 60 cents, but the Newsboys could get refunds on any unsold newspapers. This was great for the Newsboys as it allowed them to stop working so late and make more of a profit. With a bigger profit, the Newsboys' lives became easier. A Broadway play made in 2011 was dedicated to the Newsboys. The play instantly drew critical acclaim. A group of superheroes was also made by DC named the Newsboy Legion. The Newsboy Legion has had over 60 comics and has seen various forms in various comics. But most importantly, the Newsboys are credited with bringing attention to the child labor movement. In the end, the Newsboys taught companies of their time and later on that people who needed their jobs should not be taken advantage of. The legacy of the Newsboys' courageous stand helped provide the foundation for what would later become the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, also known as the Child Labor Laws. These laws were enacted to ensure that when young people work, their work is safe and does not jeopardize their wealth, well-being, or educational opportunities.